All right, folks. Happy Friday here, April 3rd. My name's Dave Kotowski. I'm the founder of Elevate Academy. And the Elevate Academy is all about people who love sports, especially student athletes and people who can impact student athletes, especially at this crazy time that we're all experiencing globally, not just here in the US, but globally. And today I have an unbelievable guest in Ross Greenburg. So, Ross, welcome to the Elevate Academy.
I love being here with you, Dave. You know, we're both wearing our brown hats. We're
We had
brothers
to.
for life.
I got my brown,
Yeah, I saw that.
and and Ross is a former Brown football player, so we got the Brown football poster behind me, framed up on the wall. We were both football players at Brown, but I also played lacrosse and I wrestled too. So Ross, let's jump into a little bit about your background. Now, you grew up in Scarsdale.
Yeah, I grew up in Scarsdale, New York, down the street from my best friend was a guy named Kyle Gifford, whose dad was Frank Gifford.
No way.
Yeah. And that's really how I got into sports television, through Frank. I lived right on Wingfoot, and Wingfoot hosted U.S. Opens all the way back then. So in high school, he would get myself and Kyle these odd jobs working golf tournaments for ABC Sports, which then was the king of sports television.
Oh, sure.
So that's how
The
it all
wide world of
started for me.
sports. The wide world of sports.
You bet.
I
Jim
still
McKay,
remember the skier tumbling down.
Yes. Yeah. So that was how it all started for me back in Scarsdale.
Well, one of the things that we do have to give a quick shout out, Rippy Phillips from Scarsdale and Scarsdale football, and great football and lacrosse player, the Phillips family. He told me to make sure we said hello.
Yeah. He needs that. You know, he's got a fragile ego, so he needs a little shout out now and then.
Absolutely.
He's a special person who's kept the alumni of Scarsdale football alive.
He really has. He's done a great job. So that's an amazing story. I've only been to Wingfoot once, and I was there actually. My wife was pregnant, I think, with my first child. So I snuck my cell phone in because she was really pregnant, just in case I got the phone call.
Yeah.
And I remember I was on one of the fairways, and it was a golfer from Texas. He was just about to hit his ball, and my phone rang. And he looked at me, and I looked at him. I just started running.
That's a no-no, yeah.
Ripped it away.
Yeah, no, they're pretty strict, you know. They have those U.S. Open rules.
That they are. So how'd you end up at Brown?
Oh, wow. I was looking for a school, and, you know, I had applied to quite a few Ivies, but I just went up there and fell in love with it. I just loved the atmosphere, loved the people there, stayed overnight with, not name dropping, but remember Allie Sherman, the coach of the New York
Sure,
Giants?
absolutely.
His son was a Scarsdale football player who also went to Brown, so I stayed overnight with him. And so we had a great couple of days there and fell in love with the school and decided to go.
That's awesome. You know, mine was actually kind of similar as well. I had originally committed to West Point, and I committed to West Point. I believe it was like late October, early November, but I remember specifically when it was. It was their first ever night game at Mikey Stadium, and they were playing Air Force.
Wow.
And I had gotten recruited to play lacrosse and football there. I stayed the entire weekend. I stayed with the lacrosse captain on Friday night, and then they played the game on Saturday, beat Air Force, and I think it was nationally televised game. And then on Sunday, I met with both coaching staffs, and they're like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "I'm in." And I committed to West Point, and then I went on my last recruiting trip to Brown, and same type of thing that you just said. I fell in love, and it's something I tell all student athletes now when you are going through the recruiting process, and or even just looking at schools, you're going to have that feeling, and you're going to know. So it's great. It's great to hear that you had that feeling, and I had that feeling, and I know we're both still super connected with Brown and Brown Sports and the Brown Sports Foundation and everything that they're doing as well.
I'm on the sports advisory committee, and every semester, basically, we have a meeting up there. And whenever I just drive up there, I just get such a warm feeling when I'm on campus. It just, you know, I can't describe it, but I get chills even thinking about it.
Yeah, it's definitely my second home, no doubt.
Yeah.
So when you came out of Brown, did you get right into broadcasting?
Well, I actually drove, I think, 12 hours to Cincinnati to be a production assistant at a Monday night baseball game for ABC Sports as a production assistant freelance. I didn't have a staff job. In those days, there were only 3 networks doing sports television. And so you had a choice of which one you wanted to go for. And I had had the experience at ABC Sports. So I just showed up and started, you know, as a production assistant freelance, getting, I think, $125 a weekend. And then you'd get on a series of games. You know, that fall, I got onto a series of college football games for $125 a weekend. And I was going through the process of trying to get a staff job. But of course, in those days, you know, it was very competitive. And
Sure.
I was told I wasn't getting a staff job. So I started looking around, were there any other places other than the 3 networks to get a job in sports TV? And I went to a library, and there was a cable source book about that thick. In those days, there were no internet. There was no internet. And so I looked through there, and I saw this home box office sports. And I went, I know this home box office. They're starting to broadcast in New York City a lot. They're doing a lot of Knick games, home games. You know, maybe that's an interesting place to throw a resume. So I threw the resume there and had a connection, which I didn't know there. The broadcaster, Marty Glickman, who I had gone to a summer camp that he had hosted. So I got to know him. And lo and behold, I'm having an interview with a guy named Tim Brain, who was the only other person in the sports department at HBO. And he needed someone, he needed a production assistant, and he hired me. So I was the second person at HBO Sports.
Wow.
And then, you know, within a year I was producing, because at 23, there was no one there to do it. And so
Sure.
I immediately was, you know, doing things that I had no business doing, and learned the ropes. And I don't know, the rest is history with HBO. I had a hell of a
Well,
run.
just to kind of give everyone, a kind of an overview of, you know, how crazy your career has been. And, you know, one of the things I told everyone in announcing this is that Ross is one of the best storytellers. And you really are. I mean, that's your life. Your life is telling stories.
Yeah.
Well, not only is Ross really good, but everyone who knows him in the business knows he's really good. And I'm just reading this right now. He's won more than 100 major television sports awards, including 8 Peabodys, 54 Sports Emmy Awards, 21 Cable Ace Awards, and 12 Cine Golden Eagle Awards, and 5 Monitor Awards as well. So that's just crazy. But for me, as you know, a sports fan, I've seen so many of the things that you've done. But the one thing for me that stands out more than any is the work that you did in Miracle. So, you know, we got to talk a little bit about Miracle and the 1980 team. How did that come about?
Well, it came about because I was actually, I was on a flight in 1980 when the game was happening to LA, working for HBO at the time. And, you know, the captain came on like 5 times during the flight, just announcing the score of the game. And I'm getting chills thinking about it. And at the end, when he announced that the US had beaten the Soviet Union, there was this huge eruption on a plane, you know, 160 passengers or whatever, just screaming. And I never forgot that moment. And many years later, like in 2000, you know, I said, you know, that was more than a hockey game. That was a story that needs to be told. It had a bad movie made with Carl Malden playing Herb Brooks in like 1981. And, you know, it came on and left and no one cared about it because it was too early. But I figured if you dove into that story, you'd find something really special. So at the time, I greenlit a documentary for HBO Sports called Do You Believe in Miracles? You know, the story of the U.S. hockey team.
I got goosebumps just saying the words.
Yeah. So we did that documentary and found some wonderful stories, found some wonderful scenes, frankly, for a movie. We're in the middle of that documentary, and I decided that this is a movie. This isn't just a documentary. So I got the rights to Herb Brooks's life story, and I, you know, got them. And at that point in my contract, I could I would have to put everything in front of HBO, and they decided to pass on it.
Wow.
So I went to Disney, and Disney, a guy named Mark Verratti, and I'm in his office, and he basically bought the movie in 30 seconds. He had always wanted to do the story, and Disney bought it, and we set out with Herb, and hooked up with Gavin O'Connor, one of the great directors, who had never done a feature of that size, and had a couple of co-patriots, Mark Ciardi, Gordon Gray, as producers with me. And Herb unfortunately passed away maybe 3 weeks before we started principal photography, which was really sad. But he saw us starting to make it, and we had a lot of conversations about it, and helped us tell the story, and got Ruzioni involved and Craig involved, got everyone involved from the team, got the rights to every player, all 20. And we set out to write a great script. And, after a couple of passes, we got this guy, Mike Rich, who wrote the script. You can't make a great movie without a great script.
Sure.
And from there it was off to the races. And then, Miracle became reality. And, I'm so proud of it now, because all these years later, it's been 15 years. And all these years later, it's become a real valuable movie, and a movie that I know a lot of sports teams use the night before a big game. And it's become a signature of who I am.
Oh God, I've watched that. I've watched Miracle on many road trip.
I know.
In cars, in buses.
I know.
And, it's so special. It's incredible. So
I'm looking forward to making some more.
Well, can we share any news on what you're doing?
No,
now?
I can't yet. I'm very close, but I can't yet share the news because they don't want to announce it yet. But I have one coming soon.
A teaser. So,
all right.
Well, can we talk about what sport it is, or?
No, I can't. I can't.
You're the worst.
I know. Sorry about that.
Well, all right. So you did Miracle, which is obviously, just obviously incredible, and everything that you put into that. But there's some other ones that you've done, other documentaries and stories. And besides that, just so people know and are listening, you're the creator of Real Sports. You're the creator of Hard Knocks.
Right.
The road to the Stanley Cup, the road to, all the things that you've done. And what I always loved about that, like even the Hard Knocks, was how you just wove in the storytelling.
Yeah.
And then you want to talk a little bit about, who you got as the voice of Hard Knocks and all that?
Well, in 1995, I was doing a documentary on the history of the American Football League. John Madden's idea, actually, and he was involved as executive producer with me.
And as you know, I went to school with Joe Madden, who's another Brown alum, and Joe is John Madden's son.
I know. And so we were making that movie, and I was minding my own business. I was looking for someone to do narration for all of my documentaries. We'd never really had one signature voice. And so I was minding my own business, watching the History of Rock and Roll, a PBS series, and I'm on my couch, and all of a sudden this voice comes up, and I kind of looked at the television, and I said, that's him. That's the guy. That's the greatest voice I've ever heard. I've got to have him. And I had no idea who he was. I wait for the credits, and I see Liev Schreiber at the end. So the next day I go in the office, and I look up who his agent is, and I find his agent, call him immediately and said, look, I want to hire Liev. And he said, great. He's just starting out, and let's see what he can do. He was a good actor, but he was, unbeknownst to me, I didn't know his age. I thought he was like 65 years old, because he had this commanding voice.
And what year was this?
This was 1995.
Oh my God.
So I book him for the history of the American Football League. And I'm in the studio, and Liev Schreiber has come, and he comes up on the elevator and starts walking down the hall, and I see this 26-year-old, bouncing down the hall, and I go, you're Liev Schreiber? And he goes, yep. And he had that voice, and I went, wow. And so he goes into the studio, knocks it out, and stunning, stunning, stunning. He is, to this day, other than the great John Facenda, I think he's our generation's John Facenda. And to have started him, at least in sports television, and had him do all the signature shows that he did for me, is a blessing. He's
wonderful. For all the fans out there who may not know, Liev Schreiber is Ray Donovan. So yeah. That's who he is, and his voice is so distinct. Yeah,
and he's become a legend as a narrator. But those other shows that you mentioned, whether it's Hard Knocks or Real Sports, those still go on, which I love. All these years later, I created Real Sports in 1995. Also, that was a big year, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's been around for all these years. Very proud of that show. They continue to do groundbreaking, series and segments. And I'm real proud of Hard Knocks, because if thinking back, that was, my kids at the time were like 15 or 12, and they started watching Real World, on my daughter at least, on MTV, right, which was one of the first reality shows. And I thought to myself, that's going to work for sports. If we could just get someone to allow us in, maybe we could do this kind of programming in sports, because it would be fascinating.
Well, what's interesting is with Real World and MTV, a key person there was another Brown alum, Sean Moran, who graduated Brown in 1987, was a captain of the Brown men's basketball team, and that was the year they went to play Syracuse in the NCAA Final Four at Syracuse. And Sean is one of the greatest people, a really good friend of mine, and he was a key part of MTV during all those years.
Unbelievable. So this guy comes in with the idea of following a NFL team as their rookies trying to make the team in the preseason. And so I said, well, you can't do this without the NFL Films group. And Steve Stable and I were very close, having done Inside the NFL all those years. And other documentaries. And Steve, if you remember, he really was the first to put microphones on the great Vince Lombardi and others, Hank Stram in the 60s. He's the first person that got behind the scenes in sports.
What was the classic Hank Stram line that, I just remember seeing it. I can remember him all buttoned up. He's wearing an overcoat. He's wearing a tie.
Yep.
Talking to a ref.
Well, I can tell you just one really quick anecdote to that. Len Dawson was our announcer on Inside the NFL for many, many years, 20 years we worked together. And he told me in one of the sessions, he said, what the funniest thing is? I said, what? He goes, Hank didn't tell any of us that he was mic'd for that Super Bowl, the Super Bowl IV. And he said, I would come back from the huddle back to the sideline to talk to him about what we're going to do next. And he said, every time I went back was like, I was thinking to myself, what is wrong with Hank? Why is he so out of his mind, excited and crazy? And it was, because he had the microphone on, and Len said he could hardly understand what he was talking about because he was so off character, because he knew he had the mic on and he wanted to put on a show. But anyway, back to that story. So Hard Knocks came to be in 2000, actually. And it was the first all-access reality show in
What was the first team?
Baltimore Ravens, who had just won the Super Bowl and had, characters like Shannon Sharp, Tony Siragusa. I mean, it was lightning in a bottle. And Brian Billick was a great character as the head coach. So, we were off with a bang. And again, when you have a first like that, there's nothing like it. When you can, see it for the first time as a viewer or as a producer. So that was really special. And then, of course, 24/7 evolved from there. And I've continued since 2011 with Road to the Winter Classic and Quest for the Stanley Cup in the NHL to do that type of programming. I followed Notre Dame football, Navy through a season. And
so you left HBO in what, 2011?
11, yeah. So it's been 9 years.
Ross Greenburg Productions, which is your own thing.
Right.
And with that, I know in the last few years you've done a lot. I know you've done a ton, obviously, with the NFL. You did all that work with the NHL, and then you
Right.
started doing some work with Showtime as well.
Right. A lot of Showtime work. Done 3 or 4 documentaries over the years for them. Story of Lawrence Phillips, which was very compelling. Dean Smith. Did
Oh,
quite a few for them. Did quite a few golf documentaries for the Golf Channel as well and NBC. So it's been a nice 9 years. I've done a lot of things for a lot of networks. ESPN Plus, of course, with Quest for the Stanley Cup. So I really enjoyed being able to kind of pick and choose who I wanted to work with and what kind of stories I wanted to tell.
best of all worlds, right there.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Is there one documentary? I mean, obviously there's Miracle, and I know that's like, and I encourage everyone, listen, we're going through a crazy time right now. This is unprecedented, in our world. So, we need things that are going to cheer us up and make us smile. And you talking about, telling the story about being on the plane and people erupting. I remember where I was. I was playing street hockey in front of my house in East Meadow in New York, playing street hockey, and remembering that because the game was on later.
That's right. That's right. Big delay.
Where were you? And all those things. It's like, you know what you should all do, people? Go watch the original documentary that Ross did.
Yeah.
The original documentary is as good.
There's some stories there that we couldn't use because they were X-rated, language. So yeah, I do recommend seeing the documentary. Nothing like getting the stories right out of Mike Ruzione's mouth.
Yeah.
So that was special. But there are other, docus they should look for. I mean, 9 Innings from Ground Zero after 2001.
Goosebumps again. 9 Innings from Ground Zero.
Yeah.
You gotta watch it.
The Bird Magic documentary, Courtship of Rivals, is really special.
You know what's kind of crazy? In the 9 Innings from Ground Zero is one of the kids who plays lacrosse for me, coming back to all these Brown connections, Katie Igneri. She's a junior at Brown this year, a lacrosse player from Syosset, New York. Her dad was a New York City cop who threw out one of the first pitches. They had cops throw out pitches as well beforehand.
Yeah.
And he was a cop and a fireman who threw out pitches. And he was one of the cops who threw out the pitch before everyone else did.
And that was probably Game 3, which is what spawned me making that documentary, because I was in the stadium too that day. And as Bush came in on his Air Force helicopter and then threw out his first pitch,
which was a strike.
Which has a great story, because in the back he was practicing, where the players practice in the bowels of the stadium, and Derek Jeter walked in as Bush was throwing to the catcher to make sure he was going to throw that strike later, and Jeter goes, if you hit the ground, they're going to boo you. You better do it. Like that to the President of the United States. So he ended up doing it. But I knew, having witnessed that game, I knew that was going to be a documentary. I walked into the office the next day and I said, this series is not about baseball. And, the stadium shook. And so I knew there was a story that needed to be told the next day. And then about a year or two later, we were making the docu.
It's amazing. It's so funny because, we're going through a crazy time and people need to understand that, hey, we're going to come out of this, and, we have to come out of it stronger. And one thing about our country is sports unite us. And, sports for me, I'm in the process of writing a book right now. It's very personal to me. It's like, and the title of the book is Sports Saved My Life. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, for me, it's been everything. I went to Brown. I knew I wanted to play football and lacrosse. Didn't think I was ever going to wrestle, and got asked to wrestle freshman year and wrestled for 2 years at Brown before blowing out my shoulder. And I just think about, and what else did I do? When I was at Brown, I had to have a student job with my financial aid package. I was a sports announcer. I did men's soccer. I did women's gymnastics. I did men's ice hockey. And it's like, for me, it's like I've always surrounded myself. And for the longest time, where Ross and I really connected was when I made the decision I wanted to make a living in sports. I reached out to Ross many times, I might add, saying, "You're my new mentor. You're my new mentor." And finally, you're like, "What do you want from me?"
No, I never said that because I enjoy being a mentor.
No, you're unbelievable. You're the best. But it took me a while to get through your secretary to you. And then, but you've been the best ever since.
No,
And, but that's what it does. Sports.
Yeah, sports can do a lot for you. I mean, if you look at it differently, if you look at it just as a entertainment vehicle, it's not giving it its just due. I think one of the things that it's so part of our culture, and I think one of the things that it's done now, this pandemic has done, is make people realize how much a part of our culture sports is, now that we don't have it. And it will be again. The only thing that's different between 9/11 and this and some of the other things we've lived through is I'm worried about everyone feeling comfortable getting back to a stadium. There was a certain amount of that after 9/11, believe me, in New York especially. But
Sure.
That's the only thing I worry about. When will it feel okay to go to a ballpark with 60,000 people?
Well, what's amazing to me is you talk about just, American ingenuity. I was sitting with my my high school team, and I was saying to the girls, I said, "Listen, now's the time to think outside the box. Come up with something different. Do something different." And you're watching, GE basically be able to shut down, and 10 days later they're cranking out ventilators. You have My Pillows shuts down and starts, pumping out face masks.
Yeah.
And you have two lacrosse companies that make lacrosse helmets, and they're making the face masks with the plastic on it for the doctors and the nurses. And
Brilliant.
that, to me, it's like, that's awesome. That's American. Yeah. It's American ingenuity, American pride. And it's like, we'll get through this. And then you have doctors working on the front lines, and nurses working on the front lines who are coming up with vaccines. There's news today about one of the vaccines that they've been working on where it's had a tremendous response in these early tests, and they want to, fast track this thing and get that out there. So I think we're going to be good.
I'm have to be optimistic. Everyone's going through good and bad days. This morning I was having a rough time, but I think long run we'll get through this.
Long runs. And there's another good thing too. Get out every day, get some exercise. I did 4.8 miles this morning in the rain with my dog. We both got wet, but you know what? Mentally, I need it.
Yeah. I did a 45-minute yoga class this morning with my wife, Michelle.
Yeah, I'm not flexible. I can't do the yoga.
Well, it'll make you more flexible. You don't have to go.
Everyone always says that. I can't get flexible.
I know. Give it a try.
Yeah. So one of my favorite, documentaries that you did was you had Namath was great. The 9 innings we talked about, but Lombardi was one of my favorites.
Yeah, because Lombardi, that's a fun story because he popped in my head because everyone knew the Lombardi Trophy, but there's a whole generation that didn't know anything about him. And, they talked about him not just as a field general, but a leader of men. And I always knew that he was, he had so many stories wrapped up in him. And that he was a very special man with a compelling story behind him. And so I called up Steve Sable one day, and he picked up the phone. His secretary, told him I was on. He picks up the phone, and I just went, Lombardi. That's all I said, Lombardi. And he goes, okay.
Let's go.
And so we did a co-production between HBO Sports and NFL Films, and we churned out Lombardi. And it became a fascinating doc because it wasn't about football. It was about how do you lead people.
About leadership.
It's almost a how-to on leadership. And his personal story was very compelling as well. But, it's one of those that real proud of it. Joe Levine, the producer, did an unbelievable job. and so did the NFL Films Group. And, you know, we'll always, that's another one that people should look at, you know. 61 is another film that people should catch as well.
Oh, love it.
That's a special time and place that's not getting the kind of attention it deserves.
We'll make sure we send this all out to everyone. Say, hey, you know, here's the opportunities to watch.
Well, there's lists. Yeah, there are lists out there. I've seen a couple, you know, because people are kind of digging and saying, what should you watch? What are some great sports docs? And
sure.
Courtship of Rivals was on a list I saw, and Sugar Ray Robinson, and did one on Joe Louis. I mean, Babe Ruth, we did. Rick Bernstein always wanted to do that. We did Babe Ruth because who knows the story of Babe Ruth?
Did you ever do anything on John Wooden?
Yeah, I did. UCLA, we did the Dynasty. And it was basically mostly about Wooden. In much the same way Lombardi was a leader of men, that was Wooden as well.
Well, you know what's interesting is you know, what we've been doing on the Elevate Academy is we've been bringing on, you know, key guests in different areas, a lot of college coaches. Mm-hmm. You know, this past week we had Jenny Levy, who is the head coach at University of North Carolina. She's also the Team USA women's head lacrosse coach. She's really working her butt off to get lacrosse into the Olympics right now. And she's leading the charge on that. So she's doing, you know, unbelievable work. And then Ricky Freed, the head coach at Georgetown, who, and we're all talking about coaching and talking about different things. What's really interesting, it popped in my head the other day when we were talking to Ricky Freed. John Wooden won 10 national championships. 10 national championships. And I think he won like 9 in a row or whatever it was. So he went undefeated for so many years. You know the numbers better than I do.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is, he didn't have immediate success.
No.
It was like 20 years into his coaching career when he finally kicked in.
Yeah. No, there's no question. But it wasn't that long, by the way. But it was, and the other thing you have to understand is he had rotating every 4 years, every year basically, he had people leaving and coming. It's not like he could create a New England Patriot type dynasty and have everyone stick together for 15 years. He didn't have a Tom Brady for 20 years. You know, he'd have only Kareem for 4. Yeah. He'd have Walton for 4. But he was just able to recruit and able to teach. You know, one of the funniest stories with him is Walton tells a story. The first day of practice, when he gets there as a freshman, the first thing Wooden did is sit them all down, and he very explicitly taught them how to tie their shoes.
I love the story. I love it. I know it. Tell it.
First, you put it in this little thing, you know, because he was so meticulous. He was so detail-oriented that he just wanted everything right. And every practice was to the minute, you know, and I mean, you should, I mean, Walton will dazzle you for an hour if you talk to him about Wooden.
Yeah. Have you ever read the book Captain's Class?
No.
It's a great one. It talks about, it's a New York Times writer. I apologize to him for not knowing his name, but I know the book, and it's a phenomenal book. And really what they did is he breaks down scientifically how to figure out who are the best teams of all times. And he creates kind of, how do you actually determine what's a team? You know, he said, you know, you can't have sports where it's individual. So no swimming, no wrestling, things like that. And it's got to be a team sport. And he limited it with basketball and moving up. And, but, you know, some of the top teams that they talk about, thank you, Chris, for letting me know. Sam Walker. Sam Walker is the author. And but one of the things they talk about in there is, you know, the greatest leaders and the greatest captains in there. But what's interesting is they don't have university sports. So you don't have, because of the rotation of the 4 years. So you don't have, you know, UCLA. The other person you don't have is you don't have Anson Dorrance from University of North Carolina, who's won 21 national championships.
And will be the subject of a documentary.
That next Tuesday, what's that?
And will be the subject of a documentary on the ACC network and ESPN produced by yours truly.
Oh my God. So guess what? On Tuesday, April 7th, we have Anson Dorrance as a guest next Tuesday at 1 o'clock, Anson Dorrance is going to be on the Elevate Academy.
Well, I've spoken to him twice, and we're very excited. We're really excited to tell that story. And that's another book that I just read the book. He had someone follow him for 5 years, a writer, and I'm spacing out on his name, sorry. But The Man Watching is the name of the book.
Yeah.
And
I just got it.
Amazing book. You've got to read it. You've got to read it before.
I read his first 2 books all about coaching, because it's like, I love what he said. And
he's brilliant.
He talks about make everything competitive.
Yeah.
Make everything competitive and measure everything.
Yeah. Measure everything.
Which is so awesome. So I'm pumped to have him. We're switching gears a little bit. As me as a lacrosse guy, we have to get some football people on here. I'm hoping to get Mark Donovan, who's Mark was a year ahead of me, class of '88 at Brown, and he's the president of the Kansas City Chiefs. Just won a Super Bowl. So hint, Mark Donovan, we need you on the Elevate Academy. We got to get you out here.
He'll do it.
Yeah, we'll get some football on there, but we're switching gears next week, and we're going to have 2 soccer people. So we have Anson Dorrance on Tuesday, and then kind of cool on next Friday, we have Pele's daughter, Kyla, who just did her own documentary, Warriors of a Beautiful Game. I think Netflix just picked it up.
Wow.
About women's soccer. She interviews some of the greatest women's soccer players, and I was lucky to get her through a good friend of mine who I actually coach her daughter, who's also a women's soccer player. She was a Harvard women's soccer player, Susie Petroselli. Susie just wrote her own book about her struggles as a women's soccer player and overcoming adversity. It's a great book. We're going to have Susie as a guest on in the future as well. But we have the Harvard women's lacrosse coach, Devin Wills. She's coming on Monday. And then we have, I don't know if you know through Duke, if you've done some stuff with Duke, but Greg Dale, who he's the head of sports psychology for Duke. He's coming up in a week and a half, all about leadership and sports psychology. So we got a lot of great stuff coming on. But you're awesome. Love what you do.
Thanks.
It's literally it's a game changer, and I want everyone to go out there. So the way we end up with the Elevate Academy is we have 2 questions.
Okay.
So the first question that we have, it's really actually 3. You have to answer a question from the prior guest. So Ricky Freed's question was, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what do you see yourself, where would you have ended up in your career?
Wow. That's a really tough question. I know I wouldn't have been an astronaut because that scares me.
I don't like heights.
I don't know. I'd be doing something, I don't know, because ever since I was like 15, this is all I wanted to do. It's weird.
You know what, though? That's a great answer, though, because you know what? I think there's a lot of kids out there and people who are watching this. And the one thing I'm always trying to get people to do, it took me forever. It took me forever to get into sports, and I knew that this is what I was supposed to be doing.
Right.
So you got to follow your passion.
That's it. And I've always told every student, every person I've ever talked to, by the way, I'm also teaching, and I guess I probably would have been a teacher of something, but because I still feel like I'm teaching when I'm doing my sports television work.
Absolutely.
As well. But anyway, I always tell the kids the same thing you do, which is, it doesn't matter what you're passionate about, just find it. I said the most important interview you'll ever do is with yourself. Forget having an interview with me as a potential hirer of you. The most important interview you'll have is with yourself as to what you want, and just go for it, and be patient,
I'll give you a point
and persistent.
There's a great poem called The Man in the Mirror. And I would ask everyone, Google it, The Man in the Mirror. Read that poem, because it's all about the most important person is the one looking back at you in the mirror. I can't get through the poem without crying. So
Yeah.
that's every time I read it, because it hits me. It's so awesome. We got one quick question from one of the guests.
What's the other one? Yeah.
One quick question from one of the guests is, they said, sports suck us in. Is there a great behind the curtain story, that people don't know, that you have and that you've kind of uncovered over the years?
Whoa. Yeah, there's probably many.
Sure.
I once was producing a boxing event in Miami. I can't remember who the boxers were, but I do remember that Don King was bugging me that he wanted the head of World Boxing Council to be interviewed between fights. And, you know, journalistically, it just was stupid. I said, what are we gonna ask him? I don't care about him, but he wanted to just pull a favor, right? So I refused to do the interview. And after the fight, King comes marching 100 miles an hour to the television trucks. And, you know, the people that worked with me, they locked me in the television truck and he couldn't get in to yell at me, you know, to scream at me.
Right.
But he had a nice time screaming at my boss at the time. But those are the kind of crazy stories that, you know, the other weird story, boxing related, is we were doing a huge fight like Hagler-Leonard or something.
Big
and
one.
so it's like 30 minutes before the fight, and these two guys come walking in the truck, and they show me a badge, and they go, "We're with the FBI." And I was like, "What?"
Okay.
And he goes, "Yeah, we're with the FBI, and there's a couple of mobsters that we know are getting tickets to this fight and sitting in the first 2 or 3 rows. So we need to stand here behind you, and you've got like all these cameras, these 15 cameras, and I need to see whether I can spot them in the crowd." I said, "By all means, do whatever you want." So that's the most bizarre.
Wow, that's interesting having FBI help out with your production. Camera 1, please.
Well, they started to talk to me about, can we just get him to pan to his left? I said, "Guys, I'm getting ready to produce a big event here. I can't have cameramen combing the crowd for your mobsters."
Oh, that's great. That is great. Well, we could go on all day, but the next thing for you is, I got to ask you. So our next guest is Devin Wells. She's the head coach at Harvard. She's a Dartmouth grad, sticking to the Ivy League theme here. What's a question you want us to ask Devin?
I'd say, you know, when you play every other Ivy League team, do you go into it knowing that the one team that all those Ivy League teams want to beat is Harvard?
I'll definitely ask her that. You know, when I was at Brown freshman year, they had in the Brown bookstore. I walk in and there's a shirt. It says Harvard University hanging in the Brown bookstore. I'm like, what is this? It's bizarre. And I flip it over. It said, because not everybody can get into Brown.
Yeah, I still remember that. The other thing, I played rugby at Brown, and we went to Harvard for a game, and we were playing the Harvard Business School. And I think the reason that everyone wanted to beat Harvard is their insignia was an H with a $sign through it on their rugby jersey.
Pretty good though.
Like, we got to beat these guys.
Yeah.
We did actually.
Pretty good. All right, so last question for you. What's the single best, because this is all about the Elevate Academy, raising everything up and giving people something to hang on to.
Right.
What's the single best piece of advice you've ever gotten, and who gave it to you?
Wow. I think it was my father.
Love it.
Because he said to me when I was first starting and I went for that job opportunity at HBO, he said, and he was in women's dress wear and he was in, you know, normal businesses. He had nothing to do with sports.
He was a Garmento.
Yeah. But what he said to me was, you know, this is in 1978. He said, "You know what? Cable television's the future." And I went, "Yeah, maybe you're right." And bang, just rode the wave. And he was right.
Smart man. Smart man. He saw the future.
Yeah, he did. He sure
Well,
did.
listen, as much as we see the future, you got to keep telling the stories from the past.
I will.
And keep us filled with these stories because they're amazing. They inspire us. They make us want to do more as coaches. They help us as tools to be able to show our kids. And that's what it's all about right now. So, you know, once again, Ross, I can't thank you enough. This has been awesome. And we appreciate your time. And we can't wait to hear some awesome news that what do you have coming out next.
Okay, thanks.
Got to make sure you share it here. All right, Ross, thank you so much, bud.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Every true.
Okay, you too.